They said a man with empty pockets had nothing left to lose, but Caleb Turner discovered that evening that the poorest hour of a life can still be the hour when mercy starts looking for him. Rain fell over the back lot of Harlan Farm equipment in thin gray sheets, turning the Tennessee red dirt into slick clay that clung to Caleb's boots as he stepped out through the service door with a cardboard box in both hands. The shop lights buzzed behind him. The roll-up doors were already closing. Inside the box were a dented thermos, 2 worn work gloves, a cracked phone charger, a faded photograph from his army years, and a time card that would never be punched again. Caleb was 40 years old, a white-skinned veteran with a tall frame, broad shoulders, a square weathered face, faint stubble along his jaw, and dark brown hair slightly messy on top with a few silver streaks at the temples. His red and black flannel jacket was worn thin at the elbows, the faded denim shirt beneath it was damp at the collar, his rugged jeans were marked with grease and road dust, and his old weathered boots sank slightly into the mud with every step. On his left wrist, a scratched military watch kept ticking as if discipline still mattered, even when the world had just taken away his last steady paycheck. He had been let go 10 minutes before closing, not because he could not do the work, but because he had stood up for an older mechanic whose hands had begun to shake while repairing a tractor engine. Caleb had taken the blame for the delay without raising his voice. He had learned years ago that anger could fill a room quickly, but it rarely fixed anything worth saving. The manager had called him difficult, unreliable, a burden on the schedule. Caleb had simply nodded, gathered his things, and walked into the rain. Across the lot, his old green pickup waited beneath a crooked security light, rust along the wheel wells, one headlight clouded with age. Inside the passenger seat sat Scout, his 6-year-old German shepherd, classic black and tan fur shining softly in the dim light, upright ears alert, intelligent amber eyes watching Caleb with a quiet steadiness that made words unnecessary. A simple black tactical harness rested across the dog's strong chest, and his posture held the calm patience of a loyal guardian who understood when a man needed silence more than sympathy. Caleb opened the driver's door, set the cardboard box on the floorboard, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Rain tapped on the roof. The windshield blurred the empty lot into streaks of silver and orange. His wallet held $12 and a gas station receipt. His bank account was thin enough to make arithmetic feel cruel. The room he had rented behind a bait shop was already paid only through Friday. He looked at Scout and tried to smile. "Looks like it is just us again, boy." Scout tilted his head, not sadly, not anxiously, but as if listening for another sound beneath the rain. Then Caleb's phone began to vibrate inside his jacket pocket. He almost ignored it. Bad news had a way of arriving in clusters. But the number was local, from a town 20 miles east, and something in him answered before pride could stop his hand. "Caleb Turner?" a woman's voice asked, careful and formal. "This is Eleanor Briggs, attorney at law in Bellwether County. I am sorry to call at an unusual hour, but I have been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Thomas Turner." Caleb's eyes narrowed. The name felt like an old photograph pulled from a drawer. Thomas Turner had been his grandfather, a quiet man who had died when Caleb was young, leaving behind little more than half-told stories and the smell of pipe tobacco on winter coats. "There must be a mistake," Caleb said. "I do not have any estate." The woman paused. Paper shifted softly on her end of the call. "You do now. According to the documents recently recovered and verified, you are the legal heir to a tract known as Mercy Ridge. 62 acres outside Briarfield. It has been abandoned for years, but the deed is clear. Your grandfather left it to you." Caleb looked out through the rain. The old security light flickered once above the lot. "Land?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "Forgotten land, most people would say. Overgrown, unpaid attention, complicated history. But it is yours, Mr. Turner." Scout rose in the passenger seat before Caleb answered. The German shepherd pressed his nose to the side window, ears high, amber eyes fixed toward the dark county road beyond the repair shop. His body went still in a way Caleb knew well. Scout had found missing tools under collapsed sheds, sensed bad wiring before a fire started, and once refused to enter a motel room until Caleb discovered a gas leak from an old heater. The dog did not react to nothing. Caleb thanked the attorney and wrote down the address with a grease pencil on the back of a receipt. His hand moved slowly, as if the numbers might vanish if he hurried. When the call ended, the cab filled again with rain and breath and the low hum of the old dashboard. Caleb stared at the words Mercy Ridge. The name sounded almost foolish against the reality of his day. Mercy was not something he expected from paperwork. Ridge was not something a broke man could afford to hope for. Yet Scout remained standing, nose to the glass, watching the road as though something out there had already spoken to him. Caleb started the engine. The pickup coughed, then settled into a rough idle. He did not know that the land waiting in the dark had been called worthless for decades. He did not know that beneath its weeds, broken fences, and sealed stone well, a truth had been kept safe longer than most people keep promises. He only knew that when he turned out of the muddy lot, Scout gave 3 short barks toward the east, and for the first time all day, Caleb felt that losing everything might not be the end of the story, but the narrow road that led him to the thing he was meant to protect. The road east out of Briarfield narrowed after the last gas station, bending past soybean fields, dark barns, and low hills patched with cedar and oak. Caleb drove with the heater rattling weakly under the dashboard and the receipt with Eleanor Briggs's address tucked beside the speedometer, its grease pencil letters glowing whenever the headlights crossed it. Scout sat upright in the passenger seat, his classic black and tan fur clean against the worn gray upholstery, his simple black tactical harness fastened across his strong chest, his upright ears pointed toward the night beyond the windshield. Rain softened into mist as they left the county road and turned onto a red dirt lane marked by a leaning wooden post. Mercy Ridge, the post said in paint so faded it looked almost like a memory. Caleb slowed the truck. The tires rolled over ruts filled with brown water, and weeds brushed the doors on both sides as if the land itself was trying to feel who had come back. It was nearly dark when the ridge opened before them, 62 acres of forgotten Tennessee ground stretching beneath a low sky, all wild grass, broken fence lines, and shadows. The pickup headlights swept across a collapsed gate, a half-sunken cattle trough, a barn with one side bowed inward, and a stone well sealed under warped boards. Beyond it all stood an enormous white oak, its limbs spread wide over the field like an old hand raised in blessing or warning. Caleb cut the engine and let the silence enter. It came in deep, not empty, but waiting. No porch light, no cabin window, no gravel drive kept clean by regular use. Just mud, weeds, an old barn, a locked well, and wind moving through grass that had not been cut in years. He sat there for a long moment, rain clicking softly on the hood, and felt the small fragile hope from the phone call begin to fold in on itself. This was the inheritance. Not a house. Not a bank account. Not even land that looked ready to sell. It was a place people had stopped believing in, and Caleb knew too well what that kind of judgment felt like. Scout touched his nose to the window and gave a quiet breath that fogged the glass. Caleb opened the door and stepped into the mud. His weathered boots sank nearly an inch. The air smelled of wet clay, old hay, cedar bark, and something mineral beneath the soil, faint but sharp. He pulled his worn red and black flannel tighter over his faded denim shirt, then reached back for a flashlight from behind the seat. His square weathered face was tired in the reflection of the truck window, faint stubble along his jaw darkened by rain, dark brown hair slightly messy on top with silver at the temples catching the weak light from the cab. On his left wrist, the scratched military watch ticked toward an hour when most men with sense would have found a diner, a motel, or at least dry pavement. Scout jumped down beside him and did not shake off the rain. The German shepherd stood still, head raised, amber eyes moving over the ridge with an alertness that made Caleb pause. "Not much to look at," Caleb said quietly. Scout did not agree or disagree. He simply started forward, paused silent in the wet grass, moving not toward the barn or the open field, but toward the boarded well beneath the white oak. Caleb followed, sweeping the flashlight beam over weeds, rusted wire, wild blackberry canes, and stones half hidden in the mud. Every few steps, he saw signs of a life that had once tried to stay: a cracked blue plate near the barn door, a child's rusted wagon wheel caught in briars, a fence post carved with the initials TT, a line of old fruit trees bent but still alive along the ridge. The place was not dead, he realized. It was neglected. There was a difference, though the world often treated both the same. Scout stopped at the well and lowered his nose to the ground. The stone ring was waist-high, built from smooth river rock, its top covered by thick boards nailed in a cross pattern. Moss filled the cracks. Vines crawled over one side, and a metal bucket lay on its side nearby, green with age. Caleb lifted the flashlight. "This what you dragged me out here for?" he murmured. Scout's ears stood high. He circled once, then pressed his nose to a patch of wet grass near the base of the well, where the soil dipped slightly under a curtain of roots. He raised one paw and scratched 3 times. Slow. Clear. Deliberate. Caleb felt the hair rise along the back of his neck. He crouched beside the spot and brushed away grass with his gloved hand. The mud underneath was darker, packed over something flat. He took the handle of the flashlight and tapped the ground. Once the sound was dull. Twice dull again. The third tap landed differently. Hollow. Not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakable. A small empty answer beneath the earth. Caleb looked at Scout. The dog stared back with calm certainty, rain shining along his black and tan coat, amber eyes bright under the oak's dripping limbs. Wind moved through the field then, and the old boards over the well gave a faint wooden sigh. Caleb turned the flashlight across the land again, seeing it differently now. The broken barn, the sealed well, the giant oak, the lost fence line, the weeds hiding stones beneath them. Mercy Ridge did not feel worthless anymore. It felt covered. Like someone had pulled a blanket over the truth and waited for the right footsteps to return. Caleb stood slowly in the rain, mud on his knees, $12 in his wallet, no job waiting behind him, and a dog at his side who had just found the first sign that this land was not empty. It was remembering. Caleb did not dig that night. He wanted to, not because he believed treasure waited under the wet grass, but because a hollow sound beneath forgotten land can make a desperate man feel as if the ground itself has offered him a question. Still, the ridge was dark, the rain was steady, and whatever lay below the well had waited long enough that one more night would not break it. He returned to the truck with Scout walking close beside him, the German shepherd's black and tan coat damp under the weak dome light, his upright ears still tuned toward the old stone well as if leaving it behind required discipline. Caleb folded the receipt with Eleanor Briggs's address and placed it in the glove compartment, then pulled an old wool blanket from behind the seat. The barn was too unstable to trust, and the field was too muddy for a tent, so he leaned the driver's seat back, let Scout settle across the passenger side, and listened to rain on the roof until the world narrowed to water, breath, and the faint ache of an empty stomach. He had slept in the truck before, but this night felt different. The land around him did not feel hostile. It felt watchful, like a room where someone had once whispered a secret, and the walls had spent years trying not to forget. Sometime after midnight, Scout lifted his head. Caleb woke instantly, one hand already near the flashlight. The dog was not barking. He was staring through the windshield toward the white oak, where the sealed well stood as a dark circle beneath dripping branches. Caleb held his breath. At first, he heard only rain. Then, under it, almost too soft to name, came a sound like water moving far below stone. Not rushing. Not loud. Just a thin, steady murmur that seemed to rise and fade with the wind. Caleb opened the truck door and stepped out into the cold. Mud tugged at his old weathered boots. His red and black flannel jacket clung damply to his shoulders, and the faded denim shirt beneath it held the chill. Scout jumped down beside him and moved across the grass without hesitation. Caleb followed with the flashlight beam low, careful not to trip over rusted wire or roots hidden by weeds. At the well, Scout circled once, then stopped at the same patch of earth he had marked earlier. His paw touched the ground 3 times, slow and certain. Caleb knelt, brushed away wet grass, and pressed his ear close to the earth. He felt foolish for 1 second, a broke veteran kneeling in the rain beside a boarded well on land everyone had forgotten. Then the sound came again. Water. Deep, enclosed, alive. He sat back slowly, his square weathered face pale in the flashlight glow, faint stubble dark with rain, dark brown hair slightly messy on top, silver at the temples catching the light. He had worked enough farms to know the sound of a dry well, and this was not that. Something below Mercy Ridge still flowed. Morning arrived gray and cool, with mist rising off the field and beads of rain clinging to the fence wire like glass. Caleb woke stiff, but the first thing he did was return to the well. In daylight, the ridge revealed more of itself. The barn leaned but had been built from good timber. The old fruit trees along the slope had gone wild, but tiny green apples still clung to the branches. Near the white oak, half buried in weeds, he found a stone marker carved with a shallow T. Farther down the ridge, another marker stood at the edge of a dry creek bed, then a third near the collapsed gate. They were not random stones. They traced an old boundary, larger than the fence line suggested. Caleb walked the perimeter with Scout ahead of him, holding the deed map from Eleanor's envelope in one hand and his flashlight in the other though the sun was up. The paper was newer, clean, too simple. The land itself seemed older and more complicated, as if the map had been drawn by someone who wanted Mercy Ridge to look smaller than it was. Scout kept stopping at places where the grass grew greener, even in neglected patches. He sniffed the ground, listened, then moved on. At the base of the white oak, Caleb noticed a narrow pipe half hidden by roots, no wider than his wrist, angled into the earth and capped with a rusted screen. It looked like an old vent, carefully disguised, not something a farmer would place without purpose. He touched it, and cool air breathed faintly against his fingers from below. The same mineral scent he had noticed the night before rose from the pipe: wet stone, clean water, and old sealed air. Caleb stood very still. This was not just a forgotten well. Someone had built something under it. Someone had wanted it preserved. Scout looked up at him with amber eyes calm and bright, rainwater still clinging to his whiskers. "You knew," Caleb whispered. The dog gave one quiet breath and turned toward the truck, as if the next step was already clear. By noon, Caleb had mud on his knees, questions in his pocket, and a new heaviness in his chest that felt strangely close to hope. He did not have the money to fix this land. He did not even have enough gas to waste on wrong turns. But Mercy Ridge had answered him in water, stone, and the steady certainty of a dog who had heard truth beneath the weeds. Caleb folded the deed map, took one last look at the boarded well, and drove toward Eleanor Briggs's office, knowing now that the inheritance had not given him land. It had given him a mystery with a heartbeat. The office of Eleanor Briggs sat above a pharmacy on the courthouse square in Briarfield, up a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, old paper, and rain carried in on other people's coats. Caleb climbed slowly, one hand on the worn wooden rail, the deed map folded in his jacket pocket, and dried red mud flaking from the edges of his boots. Scout walked at his side with quiet discipline, his classic black and tan fur brushed by the dull afternoon light from the stairwell window, his simple black tactical harness snug across his strong chest, his upright ears shifting toward the hum of fluorescent lights beyond the door. At the top landing, a brass plaque read Eleanor M. Briggs, attorney at law, and beneath it someone had taped a small handwritten note that said "Ring once, then wait, old buildings here slowly." Caleb almost smiled. He rang the bell. A moment later, the door opened to reveal a woman in her late 60s with silver hair cut to her chin, sharp brown eyes, and the careful posture of someone who had spent a lifetime watching families become complicated over land, wills, and things left unsaid. Eleanor looked at Caleb's weathered square face, the faint stubble along his jaw, the dark brown hair slightly messy on top with silver at the temples, the worn red and black flannel jacket over his faded denim shirt, the rugged jeans marked with grease and mud, the scratched military watch on his left wrist. Then she looked down at Scout, who stood calmly beside him, amber eyes steady. "I wondered when you would come in person," she said. Most people call first. Caleb reached into his pocket and unfolded the deed map. Most people inherit things that make sense. Eleanor stepped aside and let them in. Her office was small but orderly, with shelves of county records, framed courthouse sketches, a fern leaning toward the window, and a desk covered in neat stacks of folders tied with cotton string. Rain tapped against the glass behind her chair. Caleb remained standing until Eleanor motioned toward a wooden seat. Scout settled near his boots, facing the door, though his ears kept turning toward a tall file cabinet in the corner. Eleanor noticed that too. She sat, opened a folder marked Turner Estate, and removed several papers, yellowed at the edges but kept in clear sleeves. Your grandfather Thomas Turner recorded the Mercy Ridge deed in 1972, she said. He amended his will 3 times after that. The final version named you as heir, but the packet was misplaced after his death and only surfaced recently during a records transfer from the old county annex. Caleb looked at the map again. Why me? Eleanor did not answer quickly. She drew one page from the folder, placed it on the desk, and turned it so he could read. The handwriting was firm, faded brown, and unmistakably from another era. Caleb had seen it once or twice on old Christmas cards his mother kept in a shoebox. Thomas Turner had written a note beneath the legal language, not for a judge, not for a bank, but for someone he hoped would someday understand. If my grandson returns with little in his hands but still carries kindness in his bones, let him take Mercy Ridge. Do not let smooth-talking men convince him it is empty. Let the dog lead him where water still remembers the truth. Caleb read the words twice. On the 3rd time, his eyes stopped moving. The dog, he said quietly. Eleanor folded her hands. That line puzzled me for years. Then last week, when I finally reached you by phone, I heard him bark in your truck. Scout lifted his head at the sound of his own importance, then turned toward the file cabinet again. Caleb felt the same strange tightening he had felt at the well. What truth was he talking about? Eleanor rose, unlocked the tall cabinet, and removed a longer envelope sealed with a red wax stamp that had cracked but not fallen away. That is where it gets difficult. She placed the envelope on the desk but did not open it yet. There was a dispute after Thomas died. A development company claimed part of Mercy Ridge was dry ridge land with no usable water rights. Taxes went unpaid. Survey records became inconsistent. The property gained a reputation as worthless ground. Too expensive to clear, too remote to farm, too tangled to build on. Caleb thought of the mineral smell rising from the vent pipe under the white oak, the hollow note beneath the mud, the distant murmur of water under stone. It is not dry. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. You found something. Caleb glanced at Scout. He did. The old attorney leaned back, and for the first time her professional calm softened into something almost like relief. Thomas always said that ridge had a living vein beneath it. Clean spring water, old limestone channels, enough to serve more than one family if protected properly. He refused to sell it to bottling interests. He wanted the land placed in trust for returning veterans, widows, injured farm workers, people with nowhere quiet to recover. He called it Mercy Ridge Haven. Caleb felt the words pass through him slowly. Haven. Not profit. Not property. Shelter. Eleanor opened the wax-sealed envelope and pulled out a copy of a trust document, an old survey, and a page torn from a field journal. A small wing-shaped mark had been drawn in the corner of the journal page, the same shape Caleb had seen faintly carved into one of the old fence posts near the well. The originals disappeared, she said. Copies like these are useful, but not enough to settle everything. Thomas believed the originals were hidden somewhere on the land before he died. Scout stood suddenly. His nails clicked once on the floor. He walked to the corner cabinet and pressed his nose against the bottom drawer. Eleanor watched him in silence, then slowly opened it. Inside lay a rusted iron key with a tag so faded Caleb could barely read it. Wellhouse Lowerstone, the tag said. Eleanor exhaled as if the office itself had been holding its breath. Caleb took the key in his palm. It was cold, heavier than it looked. Outside, the courthouse clock began to strike the hour, each note moving across the wet square with solemn patience. Caleb looked at the trust papers, then at Scout, then at the rain beyond the window. He had walked into that office thinking Mercy Ridge might be a burden. Now he understood that the land had been burdened by a lie, and his grandfather had left him not an escape from poverty, but a chance to uncover what had been buried beneath it. Caleb left Eleanor Briggs's office with the rusted iron key in his pocket, and the kind of uneasiness that comes when an old family story begins to breathe again. The rain had eased over Briarfield, leaving the courthouse square wet and shining, every brick sidewalk reflecting the gray sky like worn glass. Scout walked close beside him, his classic black and tan fur smooth beneath the dull afternoon light, his simple black tactical harness dark against his strong chest, his upright ears listening past the traffic, past the courthouse clock, past the ordinary sounds of town. Caleb had almost reached the pickup when a black SUV rolled to the curb with tires whispering through the puddles. The driver's door opened, and a man in a charcoal coat stepped out with polished shoes that did not look made for mud. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, broad-smiled, carrying a leather folder under one arm as if paperwork had always opened doors for him. "Mr. Turner," he called, friendly enough to make the greeting feel practiced. Caleb turned but did not answer right away. Scout stopped beside his leg and became very still. The man crossed the sidewalk, offering a hand. "Mason Crowley. Crowley Development. I heard you had inherited a little patch out near Mercy Ridge. Figured I should introduce myself before you got buried in taxes, surveys, and county confusion." Caleb looked at the offered hand, then shook it once. Mason's grip was warm and soft. "News travels fast." Mason laughed lightly. "In a town like this, land records travel faster than weather." He opened the folder against the hood of Caleb's old green pickup and slid out a clean packet of documents. "I will be honest with you. That ridge is not kind land. Bad access road, dead pasture, collapsed fencing, an old well nobody has trusted in years. You could spend $10,000 before you even know what the problems are. A man in your position does not need that kind of weight." Caleb felt the sentence land exactly where it was meant to. A man in your position. Broke. Fired. Living out of a truck with mud on his boots and $12 folded into his wallet. Mason had not said those words, but they stood between them anyway. "What are you offering?" Caleb asked. Mason named a number large enough to quiet the square around him. It was not a fortune, but to Caleb, standing beside a rusted pickup with no job and no room paid past Friday, it sounded like rescue wearing a pressed coat. "Cash closing," Mason said. "Fast. No headaches. You walk away clean before that land eats what little you have left." Scout's ears tipped forward. Not toward Mason. Toward the east road. Caleb noticed. Mason noticed Caleb noticing and smiled wider. "Sentiment is expensive, Mr. Turner. Old family dirt is still dirt." The words should have helped. Instead, they stirred something cold under Caleb's ribs. He thought of Eleanor reading Thomas Turner's note. "Let the dog lead him where water still remembers the truth." He thought of the hollow sound beneath the well, the mineral breath from the hidden pipe, the way Scout had stood under the oak with the certainty of a creature who had heard what men had tried to bury. Caleb took the packet but did not sign. "I will read it." Mason's smile thinned by almost nothing. "Of course. But I would not wait long. Land like that only loses value when people start poking around and finding problems." Scout gave one short bark. Caleb looked down. The German shepherd was staring directly at Mason now, calm but unblinking. Mason stepped back with a polite chuckle that did not reach his eyes. "Smart dog. Smarter than most," Caleb said. On the drive back to Mercy Ridge, the offer sat on the seat between them like a second passenger. Evening lowered over the county road. Wet fields rolled by on either side, blackbirds lifted from fence lines, and the clouds broke just enough for one pale stripe of gold to touch the horizon. Caleb kept seeing the number Mason had written. He could fix the truck. Pay for a month somewhere warm. Eat without counting coins. Maybe find work in another county where no one knew he had been let go. But every mile east, Scout grew more restless. The dog stood with his front paws braced against the floorboard, amber eyes fixed through the windshield, body leaning toward Mercy Ridge. When the pickup turned onto the red dirt lane, Scout gave 3 sharp barks before the old white oak even came into view. Caleb parked near the sealed well and reached for the contract. He laid it across the hood, smoothing the pages under one hand while wind moved through the weeds. The ridge looked poor in the fading light. Broken gate. Bowed barn. Wild grass. Mud. A place easy to dismiss if a person only looked from the road. Mason's voice came back to him. Old family dirt is still dirt. Caleb uncapped a pen. Scout suddenly caught his sleeve gently in his teeth and pulled. Caleb turned. The German shepherd released him, ran to the well, and struck the ground beside the moss-covered stones 3 times with his paw. Tap. 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 The sound was clear even over the wind. Caleb walked toward him slowly. The rusted key in his pocket seemed heavier with every step. Near the base of the well, half hidden beneath a strip of wet moss, a flat stone showed a carving Caleb had missed before, a small wing, shallow but deliberate, cut into the rock by a hand that wanted it found only by someone close enough to kneel. Caleb crouched, brushed the mud away, and beneath the wing saw 4 faint letters, MRHT, Mercy Ridge Haven Trust. He looked back at the contract on the hood of the truck. The paper fluttered in the wind like something already trying to leave. Caleb picked it up, folded it once, and placed it in the glove compartment without signing. He did not know yet what waited below the well, but he knew this much: a man trying to buy worthless land did not rush through rain with cash unless he already knew it was not worthless. Caleb spent that night on Mercy Ridge with the unsigned contract locked in the glove compartment, and the rusted key resting under his palm like a small piece of weathered truth. He did not sleep much. The rain had moved east, leaving the field under a cold wash of stars, and every sound seemed sharper after Mason Crowley's offer: the wind combing through tall grass, the distant call of an owl from the tree line, the soft shift of Scout's breathing across the passenger seat. The German shepherd had finally settled, but even in sleep his upright ears twitched toward the old stone well beneath the white oak. Caleb sat behind the wheel with his worn red and black flannel jacket pulled tight around his shoulders, his faded denim shirt still carrying the smell of rain and clay, his rugged jeans stiff with dried mud, his old weathered boots braced against the floorboard. His square weathered face looked hollow in the reflection of the windshield, faint stubble dark along his jaw, dark brown hair slightly messy on top with silver at the temples catching the starlight whenever he moved. The scratched military watch on his left wrist ticked through the quiet, steady as a heart refusing to quit. Before dawn, Caleb stepped out of the truck and walked back to the well with Scout at his side. Frost had touched the weeds, turning every blade silver. The carved letters near the wing mark were still there, half hidden but real. MRHT, Mercy Ridge Haven Trust. He traced them once with his thumb, then stood and looked across the ridge. The land was ugly to anyone in a hurry. Broken fence. Leaning barn. Muddy road. Dead-looking pasture. But under the frost, green still pushed through. Under the well, water still moved. Under the lie, something had waited. When the sun finally lifted over the far hills, Caleb drove back toward Briarfield, not to Eleanor this time, but to a small woodworking shop he had noticed near the feed mill. The sign above the door read Boone Woodworks and Repair, hand-painted in dark green letters, with a rocking chair, a cedar chest, and 3 shovel handles displayed in the window. The place smelled of sawdust, varnish, old coffee, and wood smoke from a little stove in the corner. Behind a workbench stood Walter Boone, a thin old man with white hair, rolled sleeves, and hands that looked carved from the same oak boards stacked behind him. He looked up when Caleb entered, then froze at the sight of Scout. The dog stood quietly beside Caleb's leg, classic black and tan coat smooth in the morning light, simple black tactical harness snug across his strong chest, amber eyes fixed on the old man with calm interest. Walter set down his plane. "That is Thomas Turner's Ridge dog," he said softly. Caleb did not understand at first. "He is mine." Walter nodded, but his eyes stayed on Scout. Maybe so. But old Thomas always said the right man would come back with a dog that listened below the ground. Caleb reached into his pocket and placed the rusted key on the workbench, then laid a pencil rubbing of the carved letters beside it. Walter's face changed. The years seemed to gather in the lines around his eyes. Where did you find that? By the well. Walter turned the key with one finger, careful as if it might wake something. Then you found the door without opening it. Caleb felt the room narrow around those words. I found a hollow place. I found a vent pipe. And I found Mason Crowley waiting with a cash offer before I even knew what I had. Walter gave a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. Crowley men have been waiting on that land longer than you have been alive. He moved to the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and motioned Caleb toward 2 chairs beside the stove. Scout settled between them, facing the door, but his ears angled toward Walter's voice. The old man spoke slowly, as if each memory had to be lifted from deep storage. In 1972, Thomas Turner had discovered the spring beneath Mercy Ridge while repairing the old well after a drought. It was not just a little seep of water. It was a clean underground vein running through limestone, steady enough to feed farms, cabins, and a safe resting place Thomas dreamed of building for people who had nowhere gentle to land. Veterans coming home with too much silence. Widows who needed a season away from empty rooms. Injured miners from the eastern counties. Farmhands who had given their backs to other people's fields and had nothing waiting for them when strength ran out. Thomas called it Mercy Ridge Haven, Walter said. Not a resort. Not a business. A place to breathe. Caleb looked toward the window, where Briarfield moved through its morning as if no secret had ever troubled it. What happened? Walter's mouth tightened. Developers came. Watermen. Survey men. Men who smiled too much. Thomas would not sell. Then records vanished, boundary lines shifted, and the spring was declared unusable. Before he got sick, Thomas sealed the original papers under the well, in a dry room built off the old stone shaft. I helped carry cedar planks down there. I was 19. Caleb leaned forward. Why did he not fight it in court? He tried. But paper beats memory until the right paper comes back. Walter reached into a drawer and removed a folded photograph. In it, Thomas Turner stood beneath the white oak beside a younger Walter, both men holding shovels, the old stone well open behind them. On the back, in faded ink, Thomas had written, "If they buried the truth, leave the water away to speak." Caleb stared at the photograph until the shot blurred slightly at the edges. Scout rose, walked to him, and pressed his shoulder against Caleb's knee. Walter tapped the rusted key once. That key opens the lower stone hatch beside the well, not the boards on top. Go at night if you want quiet. Pull the flat rock with the wing. Do not force the old hinges. And when you go down, take your dog first. Caleb looked up. Why? Walter's eyes softened, and for a moment he seemed to be looking past Caleb, back across 50 years of dust, rain, and waiting. Because Thomas believed mercy has a sound. People forget it. Dogs do not. That night, Mercy Ridge lay beneath a sky so clear it seemed the stars had come close to listen. Caleb parked the old green pickup near the collapsed gate and cut the engine before the headlights reached the white oak, letting darkness settle back over the field the way a blanket settles over someone sleeping. He sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel, feeling the rusted key in his jacket pocket and Walter Boone's words moving through him with the slow weight of an old hymn. Take your dog first. Scout was already awake in the passenger seat, his classic black and tan fur dark against the worn gray upholstery, his simple black tactical harness fitted across his strong chest, his upright ears angled toward the old stone well beneath the oak. Caleb stepped out into the cold, red dirt firm beneath his weathered boots, frost silvering the tall grass around him. His worn red and black flannel jacket brushed against the faded denim shirt beneath it, rugged jeans stiff from dried mud, scratched military watch ticking at his left wrist. His square weathered face was quiet in the moonlight, faint stubble along his jaw, dark brown hair slightly messy on top with silver at the temples catching pale glints whenever he moved. He carried a flashlight, a small tool bag, a rope, and more hesitation than he wanted to admit. The ridge felt different at night. The broken fence line looked less like neglect and more like a boundary between what had been forgotten and what was about to be remembered. Scout walked ahead without pulling, not rushing, only certain. At the well, the German shepherd stopped beside the moss-covered stone marked with the small wing and the letters Mercy Ridge Haven Trust. He lowered his nose, breathed once, and tapped the ground 3 times. Caleb knelt, brushed away damp leaves, and found the flat stone Walter had described. It was set low beside the well, half covered by roots from the white oak, its edge hidden so neatly that a person could have passed it 100 times and seen nothing but age. Caleb slid his fingers along the seam until he found a shallow groove. He did not force it. He worked slowly, clearing soil with a trowel, cutting away thin roots with care, wiping mud from the carved wing as if touching a name on a headstone. When the stone finally loosened, it shifted with a soft scrape and revealed a small iron plate beneath. In the center was a keyhole dark with time. Caleb took the rusted key from his pocket. For one strange moment, he thought of Mason Crowley's cash offer and how easy it would have been to sign away this cold night, this wet earth, this impossible responsibility. Then Scout pressed his shoulder against Caleb's arm, warm and steady, and the thought passed. Caleb slid the key into the lock. It resisted, then turned with a deep click that seemed to travel under the ground. Somewhere below, water murmured softly, as if answering. The iron plate lifted on old hinges, not smooth, but willing. Beneath it was not a pit, but a narrow stone stairway curving along the outside of the well shaft, descending into cool darkness. Air rose from below, carrying the scent of limestone, cedar, clean water, and paper kept dry for a very long time. Caleb shined the flashlight down. The beam caught 3 steps, then a handrail made of dark oak, then a wall carefully lined with stone. On the first step, carved into the wood and preserved by shadow, was a sentence so simple it made Caleb stop breathing for a moment. Do not sell what was meant to heal. Scout stepped down first, placing one paw on the stone, then another, his amber eyes reflecting the flashlight glow. He paused and looked back, not asking permission, but offering courage. Caleb followed. Each step was narrow but solid. The old white oak's roots curved through the stone above like sleeping arms, and somewhere beyond the wall, water moved in a hidden channel with a patient silver sound. Halfway down, Caleb saw small vents built into the shaft, angled upward through the roots, explaining why the chamber below had breathed all these years without revealing itself. Thomas Turner had not hidden the truth carelessly. He had protected it like a flame cupped against wind. At the bottom of the stairs, Scout stopped before a low cedar door banded with iron. The rusted key did not fit this lock, but no key was needed. A wooden latch lifted under Caleb's hand, smooth from old oil and careful craft. The door opened inward. Warm, dry air met them, impossible and still. Caleb lifted the flashlight, and the beam spread across a small stone room built beneath the well, lined with shelves, metal boxes, rolled maps, ledger books, sealed jars of soil and water samples, folded blankets, and a long table where Thomas Turner's leather journal lay beneath a layer of dust. On the far wall hung a hand-painted sign, faded but readable, Mercy Ridge Haven. Caleb stood in the doorway with Scout beside him, the dog calm as if he had found not a secret, but a home. Above them, the field was cold, poor, and forgotten. Below it, the truth had been waiting with clean water in the walls and mercy written into the wood. Caleb stepped into the stone room beneath the well as if entering a place where time had been asked to sit quietly and obey. The air was cool but dry, held steady by the hidden vents that ran up through the roots of the white oak, and the faint sound of water moved behind the walls with a silver patience that made the whole chamber feel alive. Scout walked beside him, classic black and tan fur catching the flashlight beam, simple black tactical harness dark against his strong chest, upright ears alert, amber eyes calm and watchful. The German shepherd did not sniff wildly or rush from corner to corner. He moved with reverence, as if the room had already told him what it was. Caleb lifted the flashlight across the shelves. Metal boxes were labeled in Thomas Turner's firm handwriting: deeds, surveys, water tests, trust papers, letters received, families helped. Rolled maps lay inside long cardboard tubes sealed with wax. Glass jars held soil from different parts of the ridge, each marked with a date and depth. On the long table, Thomas's leather journal rested beside a brass compass, a fountain pen, and a folded photograph of the white oak taken when its branches were smaller and the fence lines were straight. Caleb touched the journal but did not open it immediately. His hands were rough from work, grease, rain, and red clay, and something about that book made him wish he had washed them first. He set the flashlight on the table, angled toward the ceiling, and the room filled with a soft upward glow. Dust floated like pale ash in the light. Scout sat at his left side and leaned gently against his knee. Only then did Caleb open the journal. The first page was dated April 1972. Thomas had written about finding the underground spring after weeks of drought, how the water came clean through limestone, cold enough to sting his palms, steady enough to run even when every creek bed nearby turned quiet. He wrote that water was not a thing to hoard when people around you were thirsty in ways they could not name. Caleb read slowly, lips barely moving. Page after page, Thomas described his plan for Mercy Ridge Haven, a quiet place with cabins, a garden, a workshop, clean water, simple meals, and no questions forced on anyone before they were ready to answer. There were notes about veterans who needed rest, widows who needed silence that did not feel empty, injured farm workers who needed time to heal, and families who needed a week where the world did not charge them for breathing. Caleb swallowed hard. The land above him, called useless for decades, had been meant as shelter. In the second metal box, he found the original deed and a survey that made his chest tighten. The old boundary lines were wider than the county copy Eleanor had shown him. Mercy Ridge included the spring, the lower meadow, the oak grove, and a narrow access strip to the county road. Attached to the survey was a water rights certificate signed, stamped, and recorded, then duplicated by Thomas in case the courthouse records ever went missing. Caleb thought of Mason Crowley's smooth voice beside the truck, the clean packet of papers, the offer dressed up like rescue. His jaw tightened, but he did not let anger take the room from him. He turned another page and found recent photocopies tucked into the back of the journal, papers Emily Briggs had never mentioned because she had not known they existed, and papers Mason likely did. A letter from a regional water company. A preliminary development proposal. A map with Mercy Ridge circled in red. Thomas had written one line across the margin years earlier, as if speaking directly to whoever would come later: "They will call it worthless only when they want it cheap." Caleb sat down slowly on a wooden stool. The truth was not buried treasure in the way desperate men imagined treasure. It was better and heavier. It was proof. Proof that Mercy Ridge had water. Proof that the trust was real. Proof that his grandfather had not been a foolish dreamer but a man whose kindness had been interrupted, hidden, and almost stolen by people who understood profit better than mercy. Scout rose and walked to a lower shelf, then nosed a small cedar box until Caleb noticed. Inside were letters tied with blue string. The first was from a woman in Knoxville thanking Thomas for letting her and her 2 children stay after her husband passed. Another came from a former service member who wrote that the ridge was the first place where the nights felt wide but not frightening. A third was from a coal miner who said he arrived ashamed to accept help and left believing his hands were still useful. Caleb read until the words blurred. He had entered that chamber as a broke man looking for an explanation. He sat there now as the heir to a promise. Above him, 62 acres waited in weeds and moonlight. Below it, clean water still moved through stone, steady as grace. Caleb placed the deed, the water certificate, Thomas's journal, and the letters together on the table. Scout rested his head against Caleb's thigh, and Caleb put one hand on the dog's neck. "We are not selling it," he whispered. The words were quiet, but the room seemed to receive them. Somewhere behind the wall, the hidden spring murmured on, as if Mercy Ridge had finally heard the answer it had been waiting 50 years to hear. By sunrise, Caleb had carried the original deed, the water rights certificate, Thomas Turner's journal, and the bundle of letters up from the stone chamber beneath the well, wrapping them in his old army blanket as carefully as if they were living things. The ridge above was gray with morning mist, the tall grass silvered with dew, the white oak standing wide and still over the sealed entrance that was no longer truly sealed. Scout sat beside the well, his classic black and tan fur touched by soft light, his simple black tactical harness dark against his strong chest, his upright ears listening to the hidden water below, amber eyes calm in a way that made the whole place feel less abandoned. Caleb stood with mud on his rugged jeans, red clay on his weathered boots, and the scratched military watch ticking on his left wrist. His square weathered face looked tired beneath the dark brown hair slightly messy on top, the few silver streaks at his temples catching the morning, but something had changed in his eyes. The emptiness had not vanished. The loss of his job had not been undone. His wallet was still thin, the truck still old, the future still uncertain. But Mercy Ridge had given him something more durable than certainty. It had given him a reason to stand still. That afternoon, Eleanor Briggs spread the documents across her desk and read them in a silence so complete that even Scout seemed to understand the weight of paper. Walter Boone arrived before sunset, bringing old county photographs, a surveyor's name, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Mason Crowley called twice that day. Caleb did not answer. By the end of the week, Eleanor had filed to restore the original boundaries and reopen the Mercy Ridge Haven Trust. By the end of the month, the county confirmed what Thomas Turner had protected all along: the spring, the well chamber, the lower meadow, and the access strip belonged to the land. The water rights were valid. The trust was real. Mason's offer disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, like a shadow leaving when the porch light comes on. Restoring Mercy Ridge did not happen like a miracle in a single afternoon. It happened the honest way, one aching hand at a time. Caleb repaired the gate with salvaged lumber Walter gave him. He cleared briars from the old fence line. He patched the barn roof enough to keep out rain. He cleaned the stone well without disturbing the hidden chamber below. He marked the vent pipe beneath the white oak and built a small wooden cover to protect it from weather. When the first clean water was drawn and tested, it came back pure, cold, and bright from limestone deep under the ridge. Caleb stood there holding the glass jar up to the sun, watching light pass through it, and thought about all the years people had called the land useless while life had been moving quietly beneath their feet. Spring came slow, then all at once. Grass returned first, greener near the hidden channels Scout had found. Then the old fruit trees flowered along the slope. Walter helped Caleb frame a small cabin near the lower meadow, simple and sturdy, with 2 beds, a wood stove, a porch facing the sunrise, and a sign by the door that read Mercy Ridge Haven. Eleanor found grant money, church volunteers brought tools and casseroles, and Mr. Blevins from the repair shop sent a box of spare hinges with no note except good ones should not rust in storage. The first guest was a retired farmhand named Roy who had lost his place after the farm sold. He arrived with 1 duffel bag and a pride so bruised he could barely accept coffee. Caleb did not ask him to explain. He only pointed toward the porch and said, "The ridge is quiet in the morning." Scout sat beside Roy for nearly an hour that first evening, head resting against the man's knee while wind moved through the oak leaves. After Roy came a widow from Knoxville who needed a week where no one asked her to be cheerful. Then a young veteran from Chattanooga who woke before dawn and walked the fence line with Caleb without saying much at all. Mercy Ridge did not fix people loudly. It gave them water, work, space, and the dignity of not being rushed. By late autumn, the barn stood straight again, the well stones were cleaned, the lower meadow had a gravel path, and the white oak shaded a circle of benches built from cedar. Caleb still wore the same red and black flannel jacket, the same faded denim shirt, the same rugged jeans and weathered boots, but he no longer looked like a man waiting for the next door to close. One evening, as gold light poured over the Tennessee hills, he stood beneath the oak while Scout lay at his feet, the dog's amber eyes half closed, ears still tuned to the earth. The hidden spring murmured below them, steady as prayer. Caleb looked across the land once called worthless and understood at last that inheritance was not always something a person receives. Sometimes it is something a person agrees to protect. And sometimes the truth waits under weeds, stone, and silence until a good dog hears it breathing.